If there's one thing that every war machine needs, it's money. Russia knows that all too well. The cash that it's generated from its oil and gas industry during its invasion of Ukraine has long been the only thing that helps the country keep its troops supplied, in addition to preventing Russia itself from veering into an economic catastrophe. If Russia knows how important its energy products are, you can bet Ukraine knows it too. For months, Ukraine has been smashing holes into Russian oil refining and shipping. Now it's turned its attention to Russia's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, lifeline. Ukraine has obliterated a huge part of that lifeline, bringing Vladimir Putin's war machine one step closer to grinding to a complete halt. As has become a regular occurrence in 2025, Ukraine recently sent its long-range drones into Russian territory to do untold damage to the resources upon which Putin relies to sustain his invasion. This time it was the Security Service of Ukraine, or SBU, that carried out the operation. On December 5th, the SBU piloted its drones into the Krasnodar Krai region of Russia. Once there, the drones honed in on the Temryuk seaport. According to ShipNext, that port feeds into the Sea of Azov and is becoming increasingly important to Russia as it tries to ship as much cargo to international clients as possible. The outlet calls Temryuk a developing international port which remains ice-free in winter, which makes it something of a golden goose for Russia, which is often forced to deal with its mainland ports icing over when the cold weather comes. Each year, Temryuk is able to process about 580 ships, which collectively transport 1 million tons of cargo in and out of Russia. Those numbers will grow as Temryuk develops, and that makes the port a clear military target for Ukraine. Among the cargo shipped out of Temryuk is the LNG that we mentioned in the introduction to the video. You can probably guess where the SBU drones were headed based on that fact, and you'd be right. The many storage tanks holding LNG that are located in the port were the SBU's targets, and the organization's drones scored direct hit after direct hit. The damage done to Russia was enormous, as Ukraine's General Staff explained in a December 8th Telegram post that assessed the outcome of the strike. The results of the strike on December 5th, 2025 by UAVs on the Temryuk seaport, Krasnodar Krai, Russia, which is involved in supplying the Russian occupation army, have been specified, the General Staff declared. The destruction of 20 tanks, which accounts for 70% of the total, has been confirmed. In its own report, the Kyiv Independent added that Ukraine's drones managed to strike the port's LNG loading rack, upon which over 24 rail tanks are stored. By the time of the General Staff's report, the fire the SBU drones caused had spread across almost 1,000 square meters, or over 10,700 square feet of the port. You may notice something interesting about the dates we've just shared. The SBU struck Temryuk on December 5th. The follow-up report didn't come until 3 days later, and that report claims that not only did the drones strike their target successfully, that the fire they caused is still raging. In other words, Russia has had 72 hours to put out the blaze at one of its few ice-free seaports, and it's failed to do so. Such an intense fire may ensure that the port doesn't have to worry about ice as we get deeper into December, but that will be of little solace to Russia. Every hour that the fire burns, more LNG is lost, and if Russia isn't careful, the damage done by the SBU's initial strike may grow. How? Well, there's more of Temryuk that could still burn, meaning a fire that still rages is a fire that could ignite other storage tanks and facilities, unless Russia can get it under control. That control doesn't seem to be coming anytime soon, as revealed by the Kyiv Independent's December 9th report on the SBU strike. The outlet says that each of the storage tanks at the port can hold about 200 cubic meters of gas, meaning Russia just lost 4,000 cubic meters of one of its most valuable products to a single drone strike. Of course, it's not just the burning LNG that's a problem. The tanks that held the gas have also been destroyed, necessitating costly repairs that could take Russia weeks or even months to complete. So when Ukraine says that it just destroyed 70% of the Temryuk port's capacity, that is 70% of the port's capacity that isn't going to be restored for quite a while. For a terminal that can process 400,000 tons of LNG per year, losing the ability to handle 70% of what's coming in means literally thousands of tons of LNG aren't going to get to where it needs to go for the foreseeable future. Russia will have LNG customers waiting. Delays in deliveries are inevitable. Russia is also no closer to getting the seaport fire under control, even after 3 days of trying. A 20-second video of the fire shared by the Kyiv Independent shows that it's still massive enough to be visible from apartments that are a huge distance away. Beyond the fire itself, the sound of the blaze that emits from the port is also loud enough to be heard in the footage. Few firefighters with hoses aren't going to get a blaze of this size under control. Russia may even be forced to wait until the fire burns through the fuel available to it, after which point the Temryuk seaport may go from being heavily damaged to practically unsalvageable. Ukraine is justifiably proud of what it achieved on December 5th, but it isn't about to reveal precisely how it pulled off this strike. All that we know so far comes from an unnamed SBU source who spoke to the Kyiv Independent on December 9th. That source doesn't say much more outside of revealing that Ukraine's Alpha Special Operation Unit was behind the drone strike on the seaport, and that the Alpha unit was targeting the production facilities of a company named Maktren Nafta, which is involved in LNG transshipment. The Alpha unit has been pretty busy throughout the war, and it's often behind some of the most sensational strikes that Ukraine manages to pull off. On December 8th, Euromaidan Press revealed that this same unit had destroyed a Russian Mi-26 helicopter back in June. Again, the unit used drones, this time equipped with thermal cameras to conduct the strike, which also saw it take out part of an S-400 air defense unit. When Ukraine needs a complex strike, the SBU's Alpha unit is called in, and on December 5th, it proved why. Causing a massive fire and destroying some of Russia's valuable LNG and the storage tanks that are part of the supply chain required to sell that LNG would have been a big enough achievement for Ukraine on any other night. But it seems that Ukraine decided to go big on December 5th. United 24 media reveals that though the Temryuk strike grabbed all of the headlines, several other targets were in Ukraine's crosshairs these days. In Donetsk, Ukrainian drones shattered a Russian unmanned aerial vehicle storage facility in an attack designed to weaken the occupier's aerial capabilities. It's unclear if that storage facility contained first-person view or FPV drones used by Russia's ground forces, or Shahid drones that could be fired from Donetsk to cities throughout Ukraine. Either way, one storage facility down means fewer Ukrainians die from Russian drones. The Simaykin area, which is in the temporarily occupied region of Luhansk, was also a target. There, Ukraine's forces struck a lubricant and fuel storage facility, taking out supplies used by Russia's forces on the front lines in the process. Elsewhere in Donetsk, Ukraine also destroyed a Pantsir S-1 air defense system and a mobile fire group, all with the goal of weakening Russia's assaults in the region. And this weakening is needed. Russian forces continue to assault the beleaguered city of Pokrovsk, and they show no signs of stopping. 2 attacks in Donetsk in a single night may buy Ukraine a few more days of destroying Russian soldiers inside Pokrovsk before they're forced to make a full tactical retreat. Oh, and the rest of Russia wasn't safe on December 5th either. That same day saw United 24 media report that Ukraine had also carried out a successful long-range strike against an oil refinery in the Russian region of Syzran. This strike came mere hours after the attack on the Temryuk port, the outlet reveals, and it targeted a plant that is capable of processing up to 8.9 million tons of crude oil annually. That oil is turned into fuel products such as gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, which are used domestically, in addition to being shipped to Russia's soldiers in Ukraine and its customers in other nations. Syzran residents reported hearing between 5 and 7 explosions at about 2 a.m., and flares were seen at the refinery in the wake of those explosions. It turns out that the destroyed LNG tanks at Temryuk were just some of the many targets that Ukraine hit on December 5th. But of this array of strikes, it's that seaport attack that will do the most damage to Russia for several reasons. The first of these reasons has to do with Ukraine's evolving long-range strategy. For much of the second half of 2025, Ukraine has been hitting Russia's oil refineries with drones. That on its own is nothing new. Ukraine has been hitting refineries since at least 2024. What was new is that Ukraine took a different approach by attacking the same refineries several times over, often in quick succession, to take them offline for longer than ever before. Kapler says that this initial evolution of Ukraine's strategy saw it go from scoring one-off damage to causing ongoing disruption. The way Ukraine targets refineries has fundamentally changed. What used to be occasional strikes meant to cause damage has become a sustained effort to keep refineries from ever fully stabilizing, the outlet says. That lack of stabilization has already had a clear effect on Russia. By late October, Ukraine had hit about half of Russia's 38 major oil refineries, Chatham House says. While these strikes are by no means a silver bullet that will win Ukraine the war, they create a lot of domestic pressure in several ways. Oil refineries being shut down means that Russia has less fuel to sell both to its international customers and its own people. For the latter, gasoline shortages have become a regular feature of life. Russia selling less oil also means that it's not making the money it needs to pump into Putin's war machine. And that's without mentioning how shortfalls in gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel could impact the machine's ability to wage war more directly. Keep this point about money in mind. We'll be coming back to it later. After experiencing so much success in hitting Russia's refineries, Ukraine has evolved its long-range strategy once more. It's still hitting the refineries, as you've just learned. However, other energy-related targets are now on the docket. Again, Kapler points this out, noting that the last few months have seen Ukraine conduct strikes all over Russia and occupied Ukraine. Several Black Sea and Sea of Azov ports have been hit, as have facilities in places like Tuapse, Sochi, and Kursk. In many cases, those strikes have been against stockpiles of gasoline and diesel that were being stored at such facilities, ready to be transported elsewhere. With the Temryuk strike, LNG seems to have been added to the list of Ukrainian targets. All of this matters because it means that Ukraine is no longer going after the facilities that make the energy product Russia wants to sell. It's also going after the immediate supply that Russia has available, causing delays that will affect the domestic and international customers we mentioned earlier. Adding to this focus on Russia's immediate supplies, particularly those it sells internationally, Ukraine has also started deploying its sea drones against Shadow Fleet ships in much greater numbers. CBS News reports that Ukraine has already pulled off successful strikes against tankers that are part of this shady fleet in far-flung regions, including Turkey and West Africa. Where Ukraine destroys fuel that is ready to be shipped at seaports like Temryuk, it takes out the very things that ship that fuel with these kinds of attacks. Again, it's constant evolution. What started as the occasional one-off strikes against Russian oil refineries has turned into a full-blown strategy through which Ukraine takes out the means of production and Russia's ability to supply the needs of its customers, both domestic and foreign. The Temryuk strike is just the latest example of something that Ukraine has been doing for a while, though it is remarkable because Ukraine targeted LNG instead of gasoline or diesel in this particular attack. That brings us back to what we asked you to keep in mind a few moments ago: money. Russia makes an awful lot of money from its LNG sales, which, like the country's oil sales, are taxed. The Kremlin uses that tax to fund Putin's war machine. So anything that Ukraine can do to limit the amount of LNG that Russia sells is good for its long-term prospects of defending itself. Unlike with oil in recent months, LNG remains a fairly stable source of income for Russia. On December 1st, Reuters reported that Russia's LNG exports declined by 2% between January and November 2025, though that still means that Russia sold 28.4 million metric tons of the product. Much to Ukraine's chagrin, a huge amount of this LNG is being sold to the allies that are supporting Ukraine with military aid. High North News highlighted that problem in an October 30th article where it accused the European Union, or EU, of talking tough about Russia, but then failing to back up its words with actions, at least in the LNG department. Far from buying less LNG from Russia, the EU has imported record levels of the fuel from Russia in 2025. The bloc imported 7% more LNG during the first 6 months of 2025 than it did during the same period in 2024. And in doing so, the EU pumped another 4.5 billion euros, or around $5.2 billion, into the Russian coffers. The numbers get much higher when pipeline gas is taken into account, and the scope is extended to the entire Ukraine war. The EU has imported about 120 billion euros, or around $139.5 billion, of these two gases over the past 3.5 years, High North News reveals. For context, the Kiel Institute's Ukraine Aid Tracker reveals that Europe has collectively allocated 188.6 billion euros, or about $219 billion, in aid to Ukraine, with another 87.2 billion euros, or about $101.8 billion, to go. Sure, Ukraine is getting more money from the EU. However, the gap is nowhere near as large as it could be, and the gas purchase figures also don't include the billions of dollars in oil that the EU countries have purchased from Russia since Putin launched his invasion. Beyond Fossil Fuels claims that the true total of EU expenditure, when taking oil, gas, and coal imports into consideration, is around 216.8 billion euros, or around $252 billion, since the war began. That's around 33 billion more than the aid that the EU has allocated to Ukraine, leading to an outcry about what many see as a European double standard. Perhaps we see another hint as to why Ukraine is now going after ports like Temryuk and Russia's LNG in particular. It knows that its European partners are still spending heavily on Russia's gas, and it's trying to do something about it. If the EU is going to continue to spend billions of dollars on Russia's fossil fuels, Ukraine can force that to stop by destroying those fuels. There is hope around the corner in this department. Though it's taken a long time to come to this decision, the EU said on December 3rd that it has agreed to permanently halve all Russian gas imports. It will also phase out Russian oil imports in a move designed to make the bloc less reliant on Russia as an energy partner, regardless of what happens in the war. Neither of these initiatives will be immediate. The EU claims to have phased out all LNG imports by December 31st, 2026, which gives the bloc's members over a year to stockpile LNG if they have the mind to do so. Pipeline gas won't be cut off until September 30th, 2027 either. Still, these are steps in the right direction, and they may allow Ukraine to focus more of its long-range strikes on ports like Temryuk, which likely serve customers outside of the EU with Russia's LNG. As Ukraine waits for the EU to get its act together, it seems determined to do as much damage as it can to Russia's energy infrastructure. The country's refinery strikes have already caused more damage to the Russian oil industry than over 3 years of Western sanctions. The head of Ukraine's defense intelligence, Kyrylo Budanov, made that claim during the Kyiv International Economic Forum in October, stating, "This is another unpleasant truth, leading us to conclude that current measures are clearly not enough." He was talking about the economic and strategic damage that Ukraine's refinery strikes have had on Russia, and he went so far as to label his statements as simple, mathematical truth. With the Temryuk strike, we may be seeing the early days of Ukraine extending its long-range strategy to Russia's LNG. As with refined oil products, Ukraine may be of the opinion that if the EU, its other allies, and Russia's many other customers won't stop buying LNG, then Ukraine will make it so that they can't buy LNG. 20 destroyed storage tanks at a developing port is just a start. Russia's LNG sector may be in for as rough a ride as its refining sector if Ukraine maintains its focus on these types of targets into 2026. However, as Ukraine approaches its future LNG strikes, everything it's doing right now adds to the economic pain that Russia is experiencing. With refineries going offline, ports shutting down, and energy-related revenue on the decline, Putin is facing up to the very real truth that something big has broken in Russia. Find out what that something is in our video. And remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest strikes in Russian territory. And thank you, as always, for watching.